Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
As the White House turns the knife on a group of very sleepy, I'll say hungover journalists from a White House Correspondents dinner weekend with an 8:30 a.m. press briefing at the White House. And guess what? We're doing it again tomorrow, says Caroline Levitt. Yeah, Scott Bessent will be the guest of honor tomorrow morning, 8:30, as they throw the 100-day party at the White House. And that's coming with, as you typically would see, a series of high-profile interviews, big events. Donald Trump's going to be in Michigan tomorrow night doing a campaign-style rally. Can't imagine how late that's going to go, but we'll have it for you here on Bloomberg. Time Magazine had the big interview last Friday. Today, the Atlantic interview dropped. Fascinating to read through these. The quote that jumps off the page from the Atlantic. Think about this, 100 days in. The first time Donald Trump said, I had two things to do: run the country and survive. I had all these crooked guys, he told the Atlantic. Going on to say, quote, the second time, I run the country and the world. That's a direct quote. Remembering, of course, run the world. We're still waiting to hear on reciprocal tariffs, the 90-day review period that'll last until July, and the market's apparently going to be guessing until then, with references to trade deals that we have not seen emerge yet in a series of negotiations that we're told are underway, but governments from Beijing and beyond tell us that they're not even in touch with the White House. So a lot of questions that we're asking on this Monday, that we were asking on Friday, and will likely still be in the second 100 days. Flurry of polls over the weekend, and I'll tell you what, they've been busy at Ipsos because we've talked about them from last week with another new batch of numbers coming out today. Really interesting to see the approval rating here and then specific ratings on issues that are so close to this White House, that are dear to the president, from immigration to the economy. And we have a great opportunity to unpack some of these numbers with Cliff Young, the president of Ipsos Public Affairs, a good friend of the broadcast. And it's been some time, Cliff. It's not a campaign season, but it's nice to see you. I hope you're doing well.
It's great to be here on this lazy Monday.
It does feel kind of like that,
yeah,
right?
Where is everyone?
Take your time. Put your elbows up on the barrel. I don't know.
Exactly.
They're apparently waiting for tomorrow's press briefing. I want to start with approval ratings. We saw one as low as 39. I think you came in at 42 at Ipsos on your most recent round here, or your aggregate. What does that tell us about this president at this point in time? Because the superlatives have been flying. We haven't seen an approval rating this low, this early in 100 years or something. What's the truth here?
Well, Trump has always been lower than the historic average. We live in highly polarized times. He's a highly polarized individual. So I think that's less telling.
Okay.
And what's more telling is the decline. It is normal for any administration to lose creds, to lose some people as they make decisions.
Honeymoon ending.
Honeymoon ending, exactly. The historic average over the last 70 years is a 3-point decline.
Okay.
Trump is at 6 points. And so he's outstripping the average. By about twofold or so. What does that mean specifically? We have to wait and see, obviously. But I would characterize it with one word: friction. There's friction around the edges. It doesn't matter what the policy area is, but the administration is bumping up against public opinion.
Including immigration, which jumped off the page for a lot of people. And made some waves when you released that poll last week. This is supposed to be the winning issue right now as he grapples with the economy. Tom Homan this morning said, most secure border in history. We're hearing reports of mass deportations. Everybody knows what's happening in El Salvador. He says, this is what I ran on. Promises kept, promises delivered. And what did you find?
Well, it is his bailiwick. He won in 2016 on immigration. He mobilized and fortified himself in 2020 and 2024 on immigration. And indeed, it's a signature issue. And if you look at the polling, a vast majority, super majority of Americans agree, yeah, we should deport illegals who are criminals. Okay? But what is happening, actually? They disagree about how it's being done. It's not fair to spirit away someone in the middle of the night. There's a need for due process. So ultimately what we're saying, and once again I go back to my concept of friction, we're seeing a lot of friction relative to this issue, and Americans ultimately saying, I agree in principle with what the administration wants to do, but they're not being fair.
That would also suggest an opportunity to improve perception if the process changed. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say.
The end game is popular, to your point.
Yeah, this doesn't mean he can't improve again.
Right.
That is, he gains back those 3 additional decline points of decline, let's say. Yes, that's true. So if they modify the way they go about operationalizing policy, indeed, maybe Americans or some Americans go, okay, so like they've changed their tack a bit. They're more fundamentally fair when they're dealing with illegal immigrants. I can get behind them.
Yeah.
But right now, that's not happening.
Economy is another big one and helped to bring Donald Trump back to the White House. It had so much to do with prices and inflation. And now we're watching prices in many cases rise. We're seeing consumers anticipate further increases. How much of this has to do with tariffs versus everything else?
Well, there's a general sort of noise quotient.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot of focus groups and talked to Americans, talked to consumers, and this generalized sort of uncertainty is not good, right? But really what's driving the dissatisfaction is the anticipation, as you said, of tariffs and more specifically inflation. You already have households going, you know what? I might not travel in the summer with my family. Right. Maybe I should buy a few more rolls of toilet paper just to kind of stock up before things get really bad. And so you already have anticipatory behavior in regards to tariffs and inflation.
I thought we were supposed to be buying wine. Are we buying toilet paper again? That's actually something that you know a lot about going back to the pandemic, the sort of human behavior that kicks in when you see something coming. But that sounds entirely emotional, doesn't it? If prices aren't actually rising and we're making judgments on leadership based on what we think is going to happen, is that a new realm? How do you measure that?
Well, I mean, we do it. We measure it by past behaviors, right?
Okay.
But yeah, we're in a realm, we're in a moment now that's unprecedented in some ways. It's like, how do you model that behavior? It's very rare, especially in the American context, to have a leader. Yeah. The leader of the nation making decisions that potentially will affect directly the economy in the near future.
Yeah. And people see it in real time, Cliff. In about 2 minutes, producer James is going to call me and tell me that we're ending this interview because we're going live to the White House for something. Please don't do that, James. I'm enjoying this conversation, but I'm saying that because this is every other day around here. Okay, note, he's coming out now, he's in the Oval, and then the president will talk for 45 minutes. You look up the wall, all the networks take it. What kind of an impact does that have on people who are making decisions in real time or getting a phone call from somebody like you?
Yeah, uneasiness, right? Once again, it doesn't seriously impact behavior, but it impacts it around the margins. And that's what we're seeing today. As I said, Americans are uneasy, there's trepidation, and once again, specifically they worry about inflation.
Case in point, the title of this deck of polling data that you gave us. This is what people see when they hire Cliff to come in and talk to them about what's going on. It's actually called, What the Heck is Going On? That's it. Knowing the new America, what the heck is going on should tell us a lot about where we are as well. Does this not reflect the conversations you're having with people every day?
Yeah, our clients are actually asking what the heck is going on.
What do you tell them? You send them the
just
deck.
emphasize, we have a political actor that's butting up against a convention. And when you butt up seriously against convention, that creates friction and unease in humans, right? And that's what we're seeing today specifically.
That's fascinating.
We're seeing households changing their behavior, anticipating potential problems, and now we're starting to see it affect him politically with his approval ratings.
You're really getting to the Trump brand in a way, though, aren't you? Right? Has any other president occupied that space?
Yeah, no. You typically don't have, once again, a president or political actor bumping up against the extremes, testing the boundaries, right? That is not normal behavior. And that's why, in general, Americans are at unease.
It's also why his supporters love him, because they want somebody to come here and break it, as they say.
Yeah, that's part of brand Trump, to be irreverent and sort of go against the system and break the system. Yes. It is broken. You have to break it down to build it up again.
But he's found a line, hasn't he, on the number of people who look at the world that way?
Yeah, he has his base, which still supports him, by the way. It's important to emphasize that point. While he's weakening on the margins, his base, that is Republicans, still support him. But we will see, especially when it comes to the economy, if there's inflation, that will erode as well.
You wonder, and I ask this question frequently, what happens when we consider the second 100 days, the cadence? Do we still have this news cycle that we're living in now? Do we do the weave every day? Because these are the things that you're suggesting are adding to consumer anxiety.
Yeah, well, first, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know.
Sure.
But I do believe
Does it
that
start to wear off if that is the case?
No,
Do people start to get numb to that, or
they get used to it,
Yeah.
right? There's part of that. I also think that Trump is a very savvy political actor. He sees what's happening with all the metrics out there, not just approval ratings.
Yeah.
And obviously we will see, but I would expect some sort of pullback a bit from the edges.
Interesting. Do you continue doing polling, doing sampling like this straight through an administration? A lot of people associate you with the campaign, and we had a normal great dive with you throughout the 24 campaign. What's Cliff Young doing now? How does Ipsos continue during a new administration?
We keep on going.
Yeah.
Because we have clients and stakeholders and
Yeah.
people like you that want to know what's going on.
Is it different than an election cycle sort of cadence? How do you
No,
keep
we're in
these
the field
polls rolling?
We're in the field every week.
Every week.
We probably have 2 to 4 polls on different
How about
issues
that?
every week.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of clients, a lot of stakeholders that want to know what's going on.
Absolutely. So the second 100 days, you'll be out there. Whether the cadence stays the same, we'll find out together. But that approval rating, technically underwater now, could be moving throughout the next couple of weeks here. Would trade deals be the salve that lifts all of this?
Well, I think that meaning trade deals implemented, tariffs implemented, right?
Actual deals, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe tariffs going
It'll
away.
all be about inflation ultimately. I think right now we're seeing a lot of noise and public opinion reacting to the noise. But in the longer term, it'll be about whether there is effectively actually inflation.
It's great to see you. Cliff Young, what the heck is going on? That's who we ask. And a little bit of a better sense now of at least what voters are thinking about it. Find a lot more at Ipsos.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Washington this week, of course, we are marking 100 days of the second presidency of Donald Trump, when a lot, of course, has happened. The pace has been frenetic. Shock and awe has certainly been a strategy we have seen this administration applying. And the question is, will we see anything else rounded out by the time this 100-day period is up? Specifically, could we get a trade deal with one of these partners that we are negotiating with in this 90-day window in which reciprocal tariffs have been taken down to a 10% base rate? We got a little bit of an update on where exactly we are from the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent as he spoke to reporters at the White House earlier today.
I think it could be as early as this week or next week. Vice President Vance was in India last week, and negotiations are coming along quite well with them. As I've mentioned, some of our Asian trading partners have come with very, very good deals. We're evaluating those.
And we want to spend some time now with Anna Wong, Bloomberg Economics chief economist. Anna, it's great to see you. The headline on the terminal here kind of says it all. S&P 500 relief rally to meet hard reality as tariffs damage done. We talked to you about the prospect of empty shelves last week, the idea of supply chains already being scrambled. Is the damage done?
So we're going to see a barrage of data point this week, and I would say exhibit one of the early evidence of tariffs would be in the non-farm payrolls report. So first, we still expect a very solid number. We're expecting a gain of 165,000, which is higher than the consensus. But in the details, you're going to see that the trade and logistics sector has slowed down hiring significantly. And I think looking forward to May and June's report, I think we're going to see, and part of my expression, I think a bloodbath in the logistics sector. So in May and June is typically when you see trade and logistics sector contributing to one of the top 3 sectors in producing jobs. The first sector that should be producing at least 400,000 jobs next month is leisure and hospitality. We also will see the damage of the decline in international tourists in the U.S., also the decline in domestic tourism. That is going to hit hotel staffing and all that. We're going to see all of that in the next jobs report, but we're going to see early evidence of that in this Friday's jobs report.
Well, and when we think about logistics and kind of the volume of transit we are seeing when it comes to the freight that's being unloaded off the coast of California, how much would, even if we get some kind of agreement to keep talking with India and other Asian trading partners, really matter economically if the tariffs that China has against us and we have against China remain north of 100%? Is that not the greatest economic impact of anything that could come out of these?
Yeah, that's right, Kailey. So if we look at from a forecaster's perspective, if we were to forecast high-frequency trade, all it matters is the number of container ship leaving China to the U.S. And that has declined from a peak of 70, 80 ships per day to now 40. The last time I saw this data. Wow. So that's not the lowest point yet. I mean, when we look at March 2023 during the SVB collapse, that was really low. That was when there were only 20 ships leaving the U.S. So right now, those data would suggest that import volume will plunge, but has it fallen down to the basement level? Not yet. However, but you're right. Trade is not the kind of thing that you can turn on and turn off. With the reciprocal tariffs set to come online in early July, even announcing 5 trade deals between now and then, for example, with India and Japan, would not be enough to get rid of all that uncertainty that many U.S. firms need in order to restart shipping before July 9th.
This is fascinating. I'm just trying to delineate, based on what I'm hearing you say, between how much of this is psychological versus real impact on tariffed goods coming into the country and costing more. How much of that, for instance, leisure and hospitality number will be disrupted simply by psychology? People saying, maybe I won't actually take that trip.
Yeah, I think we're already seeing in the hard data all of that trend, mapping from psychology to actually not taking that trip. It's not a hypothetical. It's actually real. If you look at cross-border data from Canada to U.S., it's plunged. From Europe to U.S., plunged. And from hotel prices, as I mentioned previously, in the March CPI report, we saw very soft hotel, car rentals, airfare prices. And all of that is consistent with economic theory that the elasticity of income and demand of travel is very high, very elastic, which means when times are bad, people immediately start pulling back on travel.
All right, Anna Wong, Chief U.S. Economist at Bloomberg Economics, joining us on all things trade and tariffs and how it's impacting the economy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna.
As always, and we consider against this backdrop, Joe, and with the data we have in hand from various pollsters, whether or not the White House is putting much stock in them, a different question that shows that voters by and large disapprove of this tariff regime and don't feel confident about the way in which this president is handling the economy. It does raise the question of how exactly he's going to message around all of this when he holds a rally in Michigan tomorrow to mark 100 days in office. Yeah,
well, there's been quite a bit of packaging coming out of the White House, I guess since Friday, really, when the Time magazine interview was released. Today we get the Atlantic, an early morning press briefing at the White House as they really try to control the narrative here. But you're right. We're seeing numbers on the economy sag. He's even underwater when it comes to immigration based on the Ipsos poll that came out last week. A lot of this has to do with the method through which the president and the White House are executing plans, not the actual end goal. People seem to support what he's doing with the border and immigration. It's the way it's being handled that's turning out in these numbers.
Yeah, so we want to get more into what we can expect to hear or should hear from the president tomorrow, as well as other issues, including the tax policy he's working with Congress on. And turn to Congressman Bill Huizenga, who is joining us, representing Michigan's 4th congressional district. Congressman, good to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. When we consider the visit the president is making to your state of Michigan tomorrow, how does he need to message around the tariffs, knowing that by and large, it does seem that these policies are making Americans nervous at the least and potentially affecting their actual consumption economic behavior at the worst?
Kailey, good to be with you. And Joe, I think what Joe is leading into is really the point, right? The underlying belief that we need to do something and something significant is what my constituency, I think what Michigan and what much of the country believes. And there is no doubt that I believe he's going to go down the path of talking about promises made and promises kept. No one should be surprised at the direction that he's gone. This is probably the most transparent president we've ever had in the modern era about what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. So, how is he going to message this back in Michigan? I think it's exactly that. Look, there might be some bumps in this road, whether it's in the automotive industry, whether it's in tourism, agriculture, which are the three biggest drivers of the Michigan economy. It's manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. We're going to get to the end of this tunnel, and I think it's going to be optimistic.
Depends who you ask, Congressman. It's great to see you, by the way, and have you back on Bloomberg. It depends on who you ask when it comes to the auto tariffs, and you're right in the middle of it here in Michigan. At least the conventional wisdom is you ask people in the C-suites at the automakers, and they're going to give you a big thumbs down here because this hurts business. The workers, we're told, love it. And Donald Trump may get an earful on that when he's in Michigan tomorrow night. Where are you?
Yeah, well, to your point, the UAW has come out and publicly supported what the president is doing. And so I represent over on the west side of the state a tremendous number of the suppliers that go into the Detroit 3 and a lot of the other foreign badges. And unfortunately, over the decades, there had been a requirement. You had to offshore. You had to go south. You had to co-locate with some of these other plants. Otherwise, you were just like literally taken off the list. And I've got some suppliers who fought against that and who remained U.S. and U.S. only based in their production, and they're looking around going, look, this is the right thing to do for our workers and for the American economy. And so seeing that, whether it's Honda announcing that they're bringing the Civic back to Indiana, you've got Stellantis, you've got GM, you've got Ford that are all talking about altering and how they're doing their production. Those suppliers are doing the same thing. So are there going to be some bumps in the road? Absolutely. Is it good in the long run? I think so. Now, the question is how do we get through this? And at the end of the day, based on watching Donald Trump for 4 years in his first term, watching how he operates in this term, and just knowing in general how he operates, he is someone who is looking for that deal. It is the art of the deal, right? And he is not going to just simply sit back and let things stay static. He does want to move ahead and get to these agreements. And whether it's the Swiss, whether it's Japan, whether it's India, those are some significant things that are going to continue to move down the road. Obviously, China is going to be the big one.
Well, and we're talking, Congressman, about President Trump being the center of all of this. As he gets ready to mark these 100 days, he does so having signed more than 100 executive orders, having taken all of this action on tariffs, despite that constitutional authority technically relying on Congress or lying with Congress. When do we expect actual legislative efforts to really step up? Knowing a reconciliation fight is ahead of you, why would anyone be confident that that fight can come to a swift conclusion, given there hasn't been that much legislation coming out of Capitol Hill so far?
Well, we've had a few things going on, Kailey, trying to keep the government open. We've got a debt ceiling that's ahead. We've got appropriations that are happening. The reconciliation, the quote unquote one big beautiful bill is a significant thing. I had a chance to talk to the president this morning briefly, where we talked a little bit about what's happening. My Financial Services Committee is going to be marking up on Wednesday. Ed and Labor is doing tomorrow, and a few others are doing tomorrow. The big ones are going to be both in Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce. And so there is progress that's being made on those. The Senate has had to get through their appointments process. That's consumed a lot of their time and effort, as it should be. And so we're going to be able to do this. It's going to be fast. I can tell you the pace out here, it ain't the pace that we saw in the last 4 years. I can tell you that. It's very rapid, very active, but we're ready for this.
You mentioned you talked to the president this morning, Congressman. Did he invite you to the rally tomorrow? Are you meeting him on the tarmac?
That was one of the reasons I was kind of calling and asking. Unfortunately, because of the work that we have here, he put out a Truth Social asking us to stay here back in Washington and get that work done. I don't happen to have a committee work that happens until Wednesday, so I could theoretically go out and do that. Look, we think there's going to be an exciting announcement around Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan, and obviously this rally, which is going to be more political in nature. He's returning back home to where the home of the Reagan Democrats, those Macomb County Union households who came out in droves for Donald Trump this last election and in previous elections. He's going back, and I think it's there to celebrate it with them, and I think that's a good thing for Michigan.
Well, and we'll be covering it fully here on Bloomberg TV and radio tomorrow, whatever remarks the president makes. But, Congressman, to the point that the president wants you and your colleagues to stay there, be doing the work on reconciliation, he also has made it clear, most recently in the interview that published with Time Magazine just a few days ago, that he does not want to see Medicaid touched as part of this process, or at least for those who are eligible. How confident are you that this process, when it all is said and done, will not have hurt anyone's eligibility or made cuts beyond just the waste, fraud, and abuse we often hear about?
Well, okay, Kailey, you just hit on the key phrase on that: waste, fraud, and abuse. And I believe that has to be looked at. I mean, what a disservice to the taxpayer. Frankly, what a disservice to those that legitimately need this help when we knowingly turn a blind eye, which I would argue that has happened over the last number of years. And we've got to go in and make sure that safety net is there for those that need the safety net. And so I fully support that. The president's been very clear on that, whether it's in Social Security, whether it's in Medicare, Medicaid. Look, I sat for 6 years in the state capitol in Michigan in Lansing, and it's a partnership. Medicare and Medicaid are a partnership with the states and the feds. So the states have to be doing their part as well. But I'm very confident that, as the president said, that core function of those things is not going to get touched. In fact, I would argue as we tighten that up and make sure that the waste, the fraud, the abuse, and the ineligible people that are currently drawing on the systems, that they get pushed out and squeezed out, it's going to be able to give greater ability to then give that benefit to those that really, truly deserve it and need it.
Good to have you back, Congressman. Let's get together when you're back in town. Bill Huizenga, Republican from Michigan's 4th. I want news on Selfridge Air National Guard Base. As you mentioned, the president had spoken about delivering updated jets to that base. Maybe we'll have some news on that front. Thanks for being with us. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. We'll assemble our panel next. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Likely to be a busy week in politics as well, after what was, frankly, a very busy weekend in politics. Not just the White House Correspondents' dinner, which has reporters exhausted as we begin this week here in D.C., but of course also on Saturday, heads of state from all over the world descending on Rome, the Vatican specifically, for the funeral of Pope Francis. President Trump, of course, was in attendance, as was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. They actually met for about 15 minutes inside the Vatican in what might turn out very well to be one of the most iconic images in modern geopolitics, as the two sat knee to knee and discussed the prospects for a peace deal with Russia. We heard from President Trump as he made his way back to D.C. after that meeting about what was discussed.
He told me that he needs more weapons, but he's been saying that for 3 years, He needs more weapons, and we're going to see what happens. I want to see what happens with respect to Russia, because Russia had been surprised and disappointed, very disappointed that they did the bombing of those places after discussion.
With our eyes on geopolitics, we assembled our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us. Jeannie is Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, our Democratic analyst. Rick, our Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital. You saw the image that Kailey described, Rick. This is something that's going to be in history books for a long time to come here. The optics of this sit-down meeting on two simple chairs in St. Peter's Basilica, the two knee to knee talking, as you can see right now on Bloomberg TV, or if you're with us on YouTube. This meeting, Rick, will lead to a deal. Will it unlock progress or not?
Well, we hope so. The two of them, knee to knee in the Sistine Chapel. Talk about stepping on a news story there to see the Pope, but the press coming out of the funeral was all about Zelensky and Trump, a wartime president meeting with the most important man in the world. And the reality is maybe shaking something loose in the process. We've heard over and over from members of Trump's high command all week that we weren't making progress and maybe we just give up and let them work it out themselves. There was some really good baiting going on, but the two of them, once they got together, Trump turned his attention on Russia, scolded them for not doing more around the peace table. And then we see today, the Russians announced a Mayday ceasefire that may be an opening for real discussions to take place. So hopefully President Zelensky has gotten Donald Trump's ear in a way that can be more productive for the outcome of these negotiations.
Well, Jeannie, contrast what we heard from President Trump on Saturday in the aftermath of the meeting with what we heard from his press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, when she briefed reporters this morning, who said that the president is, quote, increasingly frustrated, not just with the leader of Russia, but also with the leadership of Ukraine, reiterating that he wants to see a permanent ceasefire and saying both leaders need to come to the table to negotiate their way out of this. Do you think this is a real attitude shift in terms of how the president is viewing both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, or is he just getting disaffected, if you will, with this entire process?
This has been par for the course with Donald Trump on Ukraine. It has been a sort of class in inconsistent messaging, if you will. He's going to end the war on day one, and then he's not sure if a deal is possible within hours after Witkoff meets Putin. And then he's back to saying a deal is possible. Then he's threatening sanctions against Russia. And then when the global tariffs are rolled out, who's exempt and excluded? Russia. And then the other day, we may secondary sanction them. And now today she is saying he's frustrated with both sides. And, say what you want about Joe Biden's approach to Ukraine. There was a consistency of messaging there, and that has all been lost with the Trump administration. And he has really turned what has been a Republican orthodoxy of we want sovereign and secure borders in Russia on its head. And we have just been living through this back and forth, which seems to reflect who he's spoken to. So I don't know what to make of all of this. You hope that Vladimir Putin is being honest and forthright in terms of wanting a ceasefire and moving towards a peace. But we've been there before. And of course, the Ukrainians first to respond today and said they'll believe it when they see it. He's been bombing civilians in Ukraine for days.
That's right. An interesting kind of ultimatum, if I can use that word, dropped by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Forget getting this done on the first day. We're way beyond that. But Marco Rubio seems to say that if it's not done this week, the U.S. may be all done here. Here's what he said on NBC.
This week is going to be a really important week in which we have to make a determination about whether this is an endeavor that we want to continue to be involved in, or if it's time to sort of focus on some other issues that are equally, if not more important in some cases. But we want to see it happen. There are reasons to be optimistic, but there are reasons to be realistic, of course, as well. We're close, but we're not close enough.
What do you make of this approach, Rick? Is this just posturing, and why this week?
Look, everything about negotiations is posturing. And I actually read this as being more positive about a negotiated settlement than he was at the beginning of last week, where basically he said, if we don't get a deal by this week, we're going to quit. This is a sea change in sort of the messaging coming out of the State Department. But the reality is the only messaging that we really care about is those coming out of the White House and out of Donald Trump's mouth, because we know that nobody has the impact on this negotiated outcome other than him. I mean, look, it's very hard. Lavrov, the chief negotiator for the Russians, has staked out territory in this negotiation. It basically is give us everything we've won for our efforts in the invasion of Ukraine, all of our frozen assets, and leave us alone and codify that ad infinitum for the rest of history. That's not really a negotiation. That is, and at a time when we seem content to negotiate against ourselves. Oh, we're not going to let Ukraine into NATO. Oh, we're not going to give them access to some of these territories that are part of their homeland. The reality is, you got to hold your breath and hope that something positive happens for the people of Ukraine who've suffered under these attacks by Putin. And we hope that Donald Trump will be able to produce something that is acceptable to the Ukrainian side, not just to the Russian side.
Well, but when we consider the Russian side, Rick, does this kind of rhetoric, even if it is slightly different in tone that we're hearing from the Secretary of State, a suggestion that the U.S. may be getting close to a point where it walks away from this? What incentive does Russia have to accelerate this process if it thinks it might be able to wait the U.S. out on this one, if indeed this agreement would have some things at least that Russia wouldn't necessarily like?
Yeah, I would have thought that we were on the precipice of walking away if Donald Trump had not sat down in the Sistine Chapel with Vladimir Zelensky, president of Ukraine, and started up a direct conversation with him. Remember, the last time they sat knee to knee, it was a disaster in the Oval Office. And so the fact that both of them came out of the Sistine Chapel basically in the same place, which was get Russia back to the table in a fashion that's productive, and get them to stop these attacks that Jeannie is talking about, which do not add to an environment that is a productive negotiation. Donald Trump now owns these negotiations. He owns the outcome. So if we walk away, it'll be our failure, not the failure of Ukraine or Russia.
It's not lost on us that J.D. Vance was not in that meeting at the Vatican. Jeannie, was that the difference between what we saw last weekend in the Oval Office?
It could be, and it's a great question because it shows sort of the uncertainty as to where Donald Trump is on this issue. I mean, for 10 years, at every point when it has been raised, he has almost always supported Russia and spoke glowingly of Vladimir Putin. And so it's hard to know what explains the knee-to-knee with Zelensky and how different that was. But, when you think about, and Rick raised Lavrov, he was on CBS this weekend, and it was literally striking to watch because it shows how intractable this issue really is. He kept coming back over and over to the fact that Russia is fundamentally threatened by Ukraine wanting a sovereign border and to move to the West. None of this has addressed that problem. And it was very clear listening to Lavrov, putting even Putin aside. There are vast powers in Russia for whom the idea that Ukraine is going to move any further to the West than it already has is completely unacceptable. So even if there's a short-term deal here, what is to stop Russia in a year, 6 years, or 5 years from going back into Ukraine? And so this is the intractable nature of this problem. And that fundamental issue has yet to be addressed in any way that we've seen, at least publicly.
Well, and I wonder also if this issue just widely, Jeannie, the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine is something that will be addressed by President Trump at all when he marks 100 days with a speech in Michigan tomorrow. Knowing how often in rallies that will probably look and sound similar on the campaign trail, he suggested he could end this war in a day. As we now have 100 days past almost, is he going to call attention to the fact that it has not?
He might not, but it was so interesting in that Time article. He said something like, oh, I'm not sure, I was just exaggerating. I don't know why people listen to that. So, he could do it in that typical Donald Trump way. I doubt he goes out to Michigan and talks a lot about Ukraine. I think he'll talk a lot about immigration and the economy, immigration in particular, because that's what they see as their strongest issue. But the economy, given where he is, he certainly wants to say he's fighting for the auto workers and other blue collar workers to bring this domestic manufacturing back to the United States. So I think that'll be his focus. He probably won't spend a lot of time on this really difficult international issue.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our political panel here, kicking us off for the week on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you both so much, as always, for joining us. And of course, Joe, we know that the president does have the power with speeches like this, as we saw on the campaign trail and have seen since, to go in a lot of different directions, even if he's there to talk about the things he has achieved.
Sure.
within the first 100 days of his presidency.
Well, that's the weave, isn't it?
Yes.
It's also how you end up moving the markets sometimes when he speaks, and we're no strangers to that. We'll get an update on the markets for you coming up with Charlie Pellet, and we're going to turn our attention to Canadian elections happening today.
Yes.
David Gura standing by in Ottawa.
Yeah, going to be a big one. President Trump weighing in on that too today. Mind you, the 51st state talk, it's still going. We'll have more ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Looking at a very different capital today, Kailey, with elections underway in Canada. One of our top stories takes us far outside the bubble, but we have sent our asset, David Gura, to Ottawa to report on this. It's impossible, though, to talk about the Canadian elections without talking about politics here in the U.S. You know I'm referring to tariffs. It goes back to Governor Trudeau, 51st state, and a remarkable turnabout here that has brought Mark Carney's Liberal Party in contention in a race where many had counted them out.
Yeah, President Trump is a factor here, and he was weighing in as recently as this morning, taking to Truth Social to wish good luck to the great people of Canada, he says, going on to say that it could quadruple in size with zero tariffs or taxes if Canada becomes the cherished 51st state of the United States of America. No more, this is a quote from the president, artificially drawn line from many years ago. So on that note, we do turn to our colleague David Gura, Bloomberg correspondent, who is live in Ottawa for us. And David, case in point as to Donald Trump being an animated issue in this election.
Yeah, there was some concern a few weeks ago about foreign interference in this election. I don't think this was the kind of foreign interference that a lot of folks here were forecasting, but that was an extraordinary post from the President of the United States today, kind of doubling down on the rhetoric that we've heard over the course of this campaign. And as Joe was saying, it's something that's really shifted the narrative of this campaign. Donald Trump talking about Canada's sovereignty, calling that into question, and really throwing into doubt the longevity of this very long-standing relationship, trade and economic relationship between the U.S. and Canada. It has been an extraordinary turnaround. If you were to go back to last fall and looked at the polling when Justin Trudeau's position as Prime Minister was very much in doubt, a lot of that dissatisfaction from the electorate hinged on the fact that people were unhappy with the economy in this country, that there were concerns about housing, for example, about growth and inflation, about debt and deficit. All of that continues to exist as a backdrop to the campaign that we're seeing come to an end here today. But this infusion of Donald Trump into this race has really upended everything. And so we have both candidates trying to position themselves as the individual who's going to be able to most effectively go to the White House, go to Washington, meet with President Trump, push back on some of that rhetoric again about sovereignty, but also about trade, and begin to broker a new kind of trade relationship between the U.S. and Canada. What that looks like will be very much determined by the outcome of this election today.
Polls closing between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. David, just give our listeners and viewers a sense of what to watch for tonight.
So this is, of course, a vast geography, and those polls are going to close in a very staggered way, but so many of those seats in Parliament are clustered in the eastern part of this country, and that is a real stronghold in this campaign for Mark Carney. We've seen him doing very well in the polling in the eastern part of Canada, so pay attention to that, and by mid-evening we should have a sense of how he and the Liberals broadly are doing here. But both of these candidates have invested a lot of time and attention in the western part of this country as well, and I think that bears watching too. Of course, Pierre Poilievre is born in Alberta and has spent a lot of time campaigning in the West. Mark Carney has as well. If this is a close race, if it's not a landslide or a majority doesn't seem assured in the eastern part of this country, I think we'll be looking very closely at sort of what may come about here in the more western provinces in Canada, guys.
David Gura, Bloomberg correspondent, host of the Big Take podcast, and I'm guessing we're going to have a good one to look forward to here with us live from Ottawa on this election day. David referring to the vast geography here that, of course, includes Manitoba, and I'm glad to say that we're joined by Manitoba's Finance Minister, Adrian Sala, with us on this election day. Minister, thanks for being here on Bloomberg TV and radio. How have the candidates spent time in Manitoba? How present have they been? And what's been their message to voters?
Look, I think we're hearing, a strong message from all individuals running for leadership of our country here in Canada. Look, we're seeing, of course, Canadians are stepping up and are turning out to vote in record numbers. I think obviously the interest in voting has been driven by Donald Trump and some of the comments we've heard from him And that's driving people to want to see certainty and, of course, looking to have a prime minister step up and provide that certainty going forward. Certainly one of the big stories, I think, over the last couple of months has been a major shift in polling towards the favor of the Liberal candidate, Mr. Carney. But I think there's a bigger story here at play, which is that both major parties now, we're seeing a lot of consensus, I think in response to what we're seeing to the south of us, where there's a real agreement around the importance of looking to do nation-building projects, finding a way forward on environmental approvals to make sure projects can move forward more quickly, and of course focusing on the development of trade corridors. So we're seeing that consensus, and I think that that's a good thing because ultimately that will serve Canada well going forward and ensuring that provinces like Manitoba continue to grow and develop.
Well, Minister, as you allude to the swings in polling, which our colleague was just speaking to as well, can you just describe for us the sentiment shift you have seen underway in Canada amongst Canadians since President Trump assumed office? Because we've heard a lot about the nationalism, Canadians not wanting to make trips to the U.S., for example. Just how powerful a force is that?
It's been an incredibly powerful force. Look, I think the comments from President Trump have really driven Canadians to unite in wanting to work together to ensure that we respond to the threats that we've seen to our economy and our sovereignty. Canadians are wanting to work together like never before in response to those threats. And so we're seeing that again in terms of the types of language we're seeing from all parties and frankly the two major parties that are contending for leadership of this country. And again, orienting them towards nation-building projects. And of course, for provinces like Manitoba, this is a good thing. We're well positioned to support nation-building work with our the energy and the role that Manitoba plays as an important trade corridor, not only to Western Canada, but also to Europe.
Minister Sala, a few data points from your Chamber of Commerce in Manitoba. Manitoba exports $18 billion worth of goods to the U.S. every year, and two-way trade between Manitoba and the U.S. is valued at roughly $42 billion. What happens to those numbers if reciprocal tariffs as threatened by President Trump, and you can add auto tariffs if you want to that equation, are in fact put into effect?
Look, we know that there's no question that those tariffs and reciprocal tariffs will have a significant impact on economies across Canada, within our provinces and, of course, our country's economy. Look, we want a fair and predictable trading relationship with the U.S. And we know that this tariff war isn't helping anybody. It's certainly not helping Manitobans or Canadians, and it's not helping Americans either. Look, Manitoba exports, in terms of hogs, approximately 3 to 3.5 million hogs a year into the U.S. economy. Now, if 25% tariffs were applied to that, that's going to have a direct impact on the cost of bacon for Americans when they go to the grocery store, and of course, everyone's favorite breakfast sandwich product there from McDonald's as well. So, look, there's a high degree of interconnectedness, of course, between our economies. We know that the risk is real, but the impacts and the negative impacts will be felt not only by Canadians, but by Americans as well.
Well, and obviously a lot of that will come down to the decision-making of President Trump and negotiations with who ultimately ever gets the majority in Parliament and then therefore becomes Prime Minister of Canada after today. But Minister, provincially, what is Manitoba able or prepared to do to offset any hardship that those who are reliant on trade with the United States may come to if we are to see a deterioration in that trading relationship?
We'll always fight to protect our jobs and our businesses in Manitoba, and our recent budget in response to the threats that these tariffs have created to our economy was focused on really helping to ensure we were sustainable and that we had the resilience we need during this challenging time. And so our budget focused in responding to those threats by bringing forward a $3.7 billion capital plan where we're focused on investing in significant economy supporting infrastructure type investments, trade supporting infrastructure like our Port of Churchill in northern Manitoba, Centerport, which is a multimodal facility to the west of Winnipeg. We've also leaned into procurement and bringing some of our procurements back to Canada and ultimately, hopefully, back to Manitoba to create more business opportunities in light of these challenges. our province, along with other provinces, are also working very closely together to reduce interprovincial trade barriers, which we know is an essential thing we can do to help create more resilience and success for our job producers in Manitoba. So those are some of the measures that we're taking in response. Again, this is about creating economic resilience during this time of uncertainty, along with other direct supports for businesses as required. We will work to protect our jobs and protect our economy here in Canada and in Manitoba, Western Canada, and we're going to do whatever it takes to do that.
To what extent is China making this more complicated as you deal with the uncertainty over tariffs here in the U.S.? Manitoba is handling 100% levies from China on some pretty important exports, grapeseed oil, oil cakes and peas, a 25% tariff, pork and aquatic products. How large is that market? How much of an issue is this for you in Manitoba?
Well, we know that those tariffs are having a disproportionate impact on Western Canada. So I appreciate the opportunity to bring that perspective here today to your viewers. Look, the impact is real, of course, on our canola producers and our pork producers. And we know that those Chinese tariffs are also impacting our fisheries in Eastern Canada as well. So they seem to have been designed to try to divide our country. Canada will stand united. Our province, Manitoba, will stand united with the rest of Canada in holding firm against these actions. Again, we're going to work together with our agricultural producers to make sure that they can find new markets for their products, and that we'll continue to support them. We're going to need some support from the federal government to do that. But again, we're going to continue to make sure we protect those jobs. Ag is a massive sector in our provincial economy in Manitoba and a key part of our value proposition, and we're going to keep making sure that our producers are supported and are looking forward to working with the federal government to work through this challenge together.
Well, Minister, as you talk about finding new markets for those goods, what trading partners does Manitoba need to draw closer here?
Well, I think there's significant opportunity for us in a number of areas around the world, but one thing I'd like to highlight is just the significant opportunities we have to expand our market in Europe as a province that's located in the middle of the country, but we are a maritime province. With our northern port of Churchill, our government has been making significant investments in the rail line that takes goods up to that port as well as the port. We're going to see critical mineral shipments double this summer from the port of Churchill. So a lot of exciting opportunity as it relates to expanding Manitoba's role as an important trade corridor for moving goods from Western Canada to Europe through the port, and ideally seeing more goods move from Europe the other way into Western Canada. So Europe is one significant opportunity for us, given that maritime port that we have. The port of Churchill is 1,500 kilometers closer to the biggest port in Europe in Rotterdam than Thunder Bay. So we do have an advantage there that we're looking to continue developing, and I think you can expect that we're going to keep working to grow that opportunity, that trade corridor, to expand trade with Europe and beyond.
Minister Sala, we've only got about a minute left. What are you doing tonight to watch the results?
We're going to cozy up somewhere here. We're here in Toronto and looking forward to sitting around and with other Canadians and watching the results roll in.
All right. Well, we will be doing the same here at Bloomberg, right. Sir. Thanks very much for joining us on this Election Day live from our bureau in Toronto. Adrian Sala, of course, Finance Minister of the province of Manitoba. And I think based off of True Social, we might be able to assume that President Trump is going to be keeping an eye on these results as well. Wants to know what's happening with the land with which he would like to see become the 51st state.
A beautiful landmass, he says, as long as you don't have that arbitrary line that, of course, we call a border. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.